60 to asylum seekers to wait on the Mexico side of the US-Mexico border for their court dates. And as a result, that's when these informal refugee camps began sprouting in Matamoros. However, since Biden rescinded MPP, he has still kept Title 42 in place, which has been pretty controversial. So that's a ruling that's kind of under the CDC, and it allows Customs and Border Protection to expel migrants due to health concerns for them, like not to spread COVID. And it's been controversial because a lot of health experts, including a lot of CDC scientists, don't actually think that it's an effective way of preventing the outbreak. And a lot of reporting has shown that that policy came out of the Trump White House. So there's a lot going on there. Biden did exempt unaccompanied children from being expelled under Title 42, but it has accounted for the vast majority of expulsions. And quickly bringing us to present day, Border Patrol has made 172,000 migrant arrests at the border in May, which is on par with 20-year highs from March and April. So that's the context that we'll be talking in right now. Unfortunately, June numbers are going to come out in a couple of days, so we'll be referencing May as our most recent situation here. But so does anyone want to, sisters, anyone want to add to something about MPP or Title 42 before we move on? Okay, I'm sure it'll come up as we chat. So let's start with Sister Liane, since you're the border state perspective here. I'm curious, why don't you tell us what you see from Arizona from when you volunteer at the shelters? And I know that you're not directly on the border in Phoenix, and that's been tricky with the pandemic, but you've been in touch with sisters who are, you still see migrants coming in. What are the trends that you're seeing, if there are surges and the needs that are arising at this time specifically?
Yes, there are certainly a variety of experiences at the border and coming into Phoenix now. I arrived in Arizona mid-2019, and at that point we were going 3 hours to Nogales, Mexico, to the Kilo Border Initiative and helping there once a month, and sometimes for a week or two at their shelter for vulnerable women and children or their comedor. Since COVID, that has not been possible. Nogales, Mexico and Nogales, Arizona provide a main business transportation crossing between US and Mexican businesses. So that border was essentially closed, restricted for business, essential travel during COVID. So we have not been there. When we were there mid-2019, or some of our sisters before that, Kilo was serving 200 to 300 migrants a day at the border on the Mexican side. That changed significantly, or I'm sorry, with the Remain in Mexico, it had to change their services along with COVID so that they were distributing food boxes rather than having all of their services for the migrants left on the Remain in Mexico site. In early 2019, here in Phoenix, there was a surge. Hundreds a day were dropped at the bus terminal in Phoenix early on in 2019. And that caused mostly small Protestant churches in the area to organize, to go to the bus terminal, pick up people, and bring them to their churches. So an interfaith coalition began serving people who were left at a bus station not knowing where they were or how to communicate. And this coalition providing each week 1 day of food, clothing, showers, help with transportation arrangements. Volunteers drove migrants to airports and bus terminals and offered hospitality overnight when necessary. At that point, migrants were from the Northern Triangle, from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Some from Mexico, Brazil, Russia, India. That changed significantly, and here in Phoenix has continued to change. We are presently not receiving anyone from Central America except Nicaragua, I'm sorry, from the Northern Triangle, except Nicaragua and Haiti. Those who are coming now into Phoenix are from Brazil, Russia, Venezuela, India. No one from Mexico is coming in. And one of the things that our migrants need to learn as soon as they come in is where they are in the process, what their legal status really is, and how to work the batteries in their ankle monitors. So in the situation at the small church where I was helping at, one of the orientations was, if you are traveling across country by bus to get to your family or your sponsor, you have 2 batteries for your ankle monitor that are good for about 6 hours. Sometimes they're longer. So the migrants were asking, so what do we do if we're traveling days across country on a bus? So one of our staff members there at the church had to call ICE to find out. And the answer was, have the migrant call their family or their sponsor and let them know exactly when they are leaving Phoenix and when their expected arrival is at their families, so that when ICE calls the family to find out where these people are, the family will know where that they are en route and when they might arrive and be able to charge their batteries again and get back online. This is a horrendous worry for the migrants. And they do need to understand they have to keep their batteries going and their ankle monitors on through their immigration hearing is delayed more and more and more. So they must show up at the hearing with ICE in their respective area where they have traveled to. And then they could get another date and another date and another date until their actual appearance before a judge. And even after all of that, they could still be deported. So even though their time here provides them with temporary asylum, they have documentation to be in the country. It is temporary, and the fear of deportation continues on.
And just to be clear, I think I heard you say that I want to make sure I got this right. You're not seeing people from the Northern Triangle, as in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. You're seeing more other countries. That's interesting. I'm glad you made note of that. Thank you.
Yes, we are seeing them now. One of the stories that I appreciated and I learned from at the small church in Phoenix, it was one day when I sat and listened to a young father of a family. He brought his wife and a 4-year-old girl and a 2-year-old son from Mexico, from Guerrero, one of the most violent states in Mexico. And as I sat with him, I realized that other volunteers were serving food and cleaning up, and I was sitting down. And I was a little wary of that and wanting and thinking I might need to be of service in another way. But then his real story began. And this family was escaping a horrendous experience in Mexico where hired assassins had entered the grandparents' home while they were caring for these two grandchildren. So their parents were out. At gunpoint, they ordered the father, the grandpa, to the floor. And with the 4-year-old crying, "Don't kill my grandpa, don't kill my grandpa." And the grandma crying, afraid. The man on the floor, the grandpa, was able to enter into dialogue with the men, who after a while discovered they were in the wrong house. They had the wrong man, and they were supposed to be at a house down the street that was the same color as this house. So eventually they left, but they left the family distraught and fearful and not wanting to stay in their home. So when the parents of the children came back, the grandparents said, "You need to leave. You have to go. Keep your children safe." So,
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into root causes and what drives them to migrate down later in the conversation, but I'm actually glad that we touched on that to set the scene as we get into our other questions and what they have to go through in their resettling. I'm going to turn this over to Sister Mary Alice, because now that we see all that it takes for them to get, straightened out on when they're entering the U.S., tell us a little bit about the networking that happens between among sisters, as a lot of what you do is helping the migrants resettle who aren't going to stay along the border. And that's this whole other process that they have to go through, and all these other documents and services to get in line. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that process when you find out that migrants are coming, and how you get in touch with sisters that way?
All right, I'm here in Baltimore, and Baltimore is basically a very welcoming city. We have a tremendous network here of services for immigrants and refugees. But I actually got interested in the networking from the border to here because when I was in Brownsville in March, I met a woman who had broken her leg. She was running away from the Migrants, the Mexican immigration officers in Mexico, broke her leg, was carried by some of her compañeros to the river, and got over the river. She was one of the ones that was let in because of her physical condition. Others that she came over in a raft with other families. Many of those families were returned to Mexico. She was able to come in because of her broken leg, which happens to be the pattern. I think there are certain vulnerable groups that they're letting in, but the great majority, they are returning to Mexico to tremendous danger. Well, anyway, she got over to I met her in the bus station in Baltimore, and Brownsville, and I was talking to her, and I realized that her destination was Baltimore. So I said, "Give me your telephone number. We'll get in contact, see what you can do for your leg." And it actually worked out very well. When she got here, we did make contact, and she has gotten help. That's just a story I tell to show that this is a possibility of how we can make connections. After that, I started working with Sister Mercedes, who's now living in San Antonio and does a lot of work in Liane. She's a Comboni sister, and she also sends me the names and contact numbers of persons that are coming to Baltimore. So I'm able to make contact and help them in a couple of cases. It was a housing question. Another thing that I discover about Baltimore itself, and I think this is true of immigrants in most cities, is that they help each other. They help each other. They have their own networks. They use WhatsApp. That's their connector. And through WhatsApp, they will be able to find jobs, good lawyers that are relatively honest or honest, because the word gets around, of who's really going to be, who has successful reports, even housing. So Mercedes sent me the name of a woman who was coming up this way, and through a friend of mine who was an El Salvador woman, I was able to find housing for this new arrival. I think the networking is a very, very important thing, and it is going on. I do believe that most of our capital cities have many resources of non-governmental organizations and church organizations that are wanting to reach out to the immigrants. Here in Baltimore, we have over 15 that came together. We had a big webinar sponsored by the Immigration Outreach Service Center that's here in the parish where I live, St. Matthews, and they sponsored a day where the immigrants could, in breakout rooms, meet with the different service groups that would give them counsel about jobs, legal assistance, housing, basic rights, financial assistance through the city of Baltimore gives financial assistance, gives rent assistance during the pandemic. And that was a wonderful day. And so all of us then became more in contact with each other also as groups that were trying to reach out to the immigrants. After that, I was able to get a hold of a community, a woman who works between the health system of the MedStar hospitals here in Baltimore. And she's the community outreach person. And she was able to help me get medical assistance for several people. And that I have found to be most gratifying. And I didn't even know that was possible. All of these things, all of a sudden you realize that there are these possibilities. You just have to keep finding them. You meet a lot of compassionate people. You meet people who say, hey, we could do this. We can find a way. And I have found that to be extremely life-giving. Just to see generous, wonderful people like that. And there are a lot of them. One thing I did during the pandemic was, because I said, now what am I going to do? We're in the house. And I was on the phone with people trying to get their documents for the financial assistance. We'd have to have birth certificates, all kinds of things. I said, how am I going to do this? It doesn't work. Some people didn't even know how to use their cell phone to send a picture. So I worked out of my car and was able to take pictures of documents with my phone, my iPad, and keeping a certain social distance and all this. So it worked out well. And at the same time, I was discovering new families. I was finding out where they live. I was making network contacts. I was making friends. They were realizing they had friends in town. And so you bring in the human element, and it's not just a question of being a professional who's trying to reach out to them, but a friend of someone who understands their situation. We would talk about the border, what I had seen. I would ask them about their countries and why they had come, and all of that exchange. So I think that's sort of what I wanted to tell you about how it works here in Baltimore.
Yeah, and I actually had just written a story for GSR on how sisters minister to migrants once they leave the border, for which I interviewed Sister Mary Alice, who went over all her ministries. And I just remember you mentioning housing, legal aid, financial, like all these things, and healthcare, and it was like, oh, that's it. I mean, really getting to the US is just the first step, but then rebuilding a life takes all these other connections and services. So it's really fascinating how instrumental like them just getting in touch with you can be for their situation. But then also for that story, I interviewed Sister Veronica because she counsels them, and they come to the US with all these needs, but also with all these traumas and emotions and a lot to sort out internally. So Sister Veronica, why don't you tell us, about these conversations, as much as you can, obviously they have their privacy, but, what can you share with us to help us better understand the emotional toll that these migrants experience coming here?
Yes, thank you. I definitely work a lot with those who are asylum seekers. We get referrals from ICE. There's a contract that we have with the U.S. Catholic Bishops, our organization, Holy Cross Ministries. And so we get referrals from those who are in deportation proceedings, who are seeking asylum. Some of them have filed and have gone to court. Many of them, their first response was that it was denied. So some of them are really waiting for appeals as well. They have sent appeals to the courts to wait to see what happens. But definitely, you see a lot of people who have experienced high levels of stress, high levels of anxiety while they're here because there's so much uncertainty. They don't know if they're going to be going back home. Other things that sometimes clients could experience is that they're living in fear here in the United States too, because they're worried about their family members. I've had clients who've had family members killed while they're living here and they're seeking asylum here in the States. So it's the stressor of not knowing what's going to happen. And as Sister Mary Alice was talking about, the navigation in a different system, in a different language, with many, many fears. And sometimes the lack of accessibility for even services. And even right now during COVID, we've been trying to really encourage people to, see opportunities about if they desire to get the vaccine for COVID. And many of my clients have had struggles even trying to get the vaccine for COVID because a lot of times when they are under ICE or they're in proceedings for deportation or waiting for their cases to be heard, they don't have their passports. And a lot of times they would go to a pharmacy to try to get the COVID vaccine and they can't do it because they don't have an official identification. So that's another challenge. And so you have many barriers that they continue to experience. As Sister Liane was talking about, sometimes the leg brace is dysfunctional and it starts beeping in the middle of the night and they don't know how to turn it off and they're trying to get help with that. And then while they're in the States and they're still waiting for their case, they also have to be checking in with ICE. They have home visits from people who are working with ICE to make sure that they're still at where they say they are. So there's high levels of anxiety in children, in adults. I work with people from all around, from Mexico, from Central America, from South America. And these are real stressors for them. So like you were all mentioning, coming to the US, sometimes it's just the beginning. And they're still dealing with the post-traumatic stress. Many of them or some of them have also been victims of abuse. They live in areas that are very high on crime. And so they get assaulted while they're here, or they get robbed, or they're very fearful because they experience also abuse from others. And there's just no support systems at times. And so trying to help them to be able to navigate all of that also creates a lot of challenges for them. But nevertheless, I think one of the things that I keep learning from my clients is the wonderful faith that they have, the resilience that they also have. My clients will usually come to me and say, I don't want to be a burden for this country. I came here because I want a better life, or I want to run away from violence. And some of my clients are survivors of domestic abuse in their home countries. And they come to the United States also seeking asylum because of that. And I know some people have said, well, we have people here and, in the United States too, who are survivors of domestic abuse. Yes, and that's true. But here in the United States, we have a lot of systems. We have a lot of support for people. People can go to a shelter for survivors of domestic abuse. There are many in places, there are no shelters in their home countries. If they go to the police laugh at them when they go for complaints talking about domestic violence or domestic abuse. And so they can get murdered. They do get killed. And it's not something that is really high on the priority list in a lot of their home countries. So they have high levels of fear, of anxiety, high levels of depression, some of them also thoughts of suicide. And so really trying to help to be able to navigate the system, to find ways of healing, to find ways of coping. is definitely helpful. Working with partnerships, that's the way, like Sister Mary Alice was saying, that's really what we try to do when they come. I work in Utah. And so we work with Catholic Community Services for immigration services sometimes if they need that. In our agency, we provide case management. We have programs. So we're really blessed in our organization because we have outreach programs where they can get information about medical services, they can get immigration services, they can receive education services. We have a parent as teacher program for those who have children 0 to 3, or they can go to a preschool program. We also provide those services to them. So we try to do as much as we can, but we always fall short. You know, there's always waiting lists because it's hard for them to be able to get access even to those services.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, and that reminds me, Sister Mary Alice, I didn't mean to cut you off if you were still talking about your ministries, but do you have any stories or examples of families or individuals who need specific like healthcare services or housing, anything else that you want to talk about in terms of what you and your fellow sisters offer to those who are still like navigating this new territory?
Well, here in Baltimore, as I said, I have found that the hospital systems are willing to help. There's a lot of compassion towards the immigrants. The stories that I have specifically, high risk pregnancy, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening is there are a lot of women coming, a lot of pregnant women coming in. And sometimes they're the ones that get over the border because of their pregnancy. So they are coming, and by the time they reach our cities, they need special help. And there is help for them. There is help for them if you go to the community outreach, almost every hospital system has someone who has a community outreach representative who will listen, who will understand the story, who will communicate it to the professionals. And the professionals are, by professionals, I mean, are the emergency room or the doctor who will have to contend with this, will have to diagnose. They come through. They come through beautifully. So I have the story of the woman with the broken leg. I have one high risk pregnancy here that was given extraordinary attention, and there were several of the organizations here were trying to support her because she was dealing with the pregnancy, which she was dealing with the fact that she had left children back in Honduras. She was terribly worried about them. Her husband had been kidnapped while she was here. This woman had this extraordinarily dangerous pregnancy. She was trying to deal with her own daughter, a little 5-year-old. At the same time, she was worried about her older daughters who were back home. And now her husband had been kidnapped and she didn't know what was happening to him all at the same time. And so we were trying to deal with all of those questions and try to get help for her, see if we could communicate with the family, find out what they needed. It's always a bigger picture than just what you're looking at. I think Veronica explained that. It's always a bigger picture because we have no idea the trauma. It isn't only the trauma back home, it's the trauma that they came through Mexico. What they went through in Mexico in so-called safe houses, which aren't safe, and the exploitation of the coyotes and the drug cartels, it's all real. And just to bring it up to the present, what we were talking about earlier, the Title 42, all those people, thousands that are being sent back to Mexico, they're sitting right there in new camps that are cropping up all along the Mexican side of the border. These aren't MPP, these aren't Remain in Mexico camps. These are camps that are resulting from the Title 42 because they haven't been deported, they have been expelled. They'll keep trying to come in. So I've met people who say, I tried 3, 4, 5 times, and then they will try to get in in some way other than through the ports of entry, what are they going to do? They have no choice. People say, why don't people come in through the front door? There is no front door. There's only a back door. That's why they try the back door, and sometimes they have more luck coming in the back door. So each question, and then I would bring it beyond that to other cities, because I know we have sisters at Hartford. Sister Betsy, who worked with us on the border, and she works with a group of lawyers. She works with a group of health workers who have mobile clinics and many other services. And then in Boston, where most of our sisters are, and many of them have gone to the border, they also are finding ways of networking and receiving people. There's an enormous immigrant population up in the Boston area. And another thing is also, whenever you get a chance to speak, to give a little talk, it's amazing how the word can get out. People really want to know, and they are so grateful when we can give them information and they know they're kind of getting the real story, not what they read in the paper, not what they see on TV, but they want to hear what we have to say because they know that we're closer to it, and they want to understand. And there aren't too many ways of really understanding the story unless we tell it. So we should take every opportunity we have to speak out.
Yeah, and you know, all three of you have touched on this, so I'll just go straight into it. You know, I've done dozens of interviews with sisters about immigration, and I don't think there's ever been an interview in which sisters don't want to talk about the root causes of migration. We've talked here about domestic abuse, briefly on cartels. Why don't we go over some of the root causes that you've all seen, maybe firsthand, drive away people you know, people you've interacted with. What are some stories that have led people to come to the US? And I'll open it up to all three of you, so feel free to jump in if you have one ready.
Some of what I hear at the International Rescue Center shows very different reasons for coming. One, indigenous families from Ecuador are coming in and saying, because of climate change, our crops have failed and there's poverty and hunger there. Cuba, we have many, many, many migrants from Cuba. And that, of course, is a very different situation because historically our country has accepted Cubans much more easily than from other places. So they have easier accessibility to a green card. However, a story of a family from Cuba with a teenage son, they flew to Brazil and then they took buses and trucks through Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Panama, all of Central America, into Mexico, of course, got stopped at the border there with remain in Mexico. Eventually, they were able to cross the border into Arizona and brought to Phoenix, where they were arranging their transportation to Miami, Florida. They spent 2.5 years on the road to go from Cuba to Florida.
Wow.
When our country accepts them, after they've been here for 1 year and a day, some of them told me, that's a broken system that has put people in danger and in horrendous situations. People from Brazil and Venezuela are coming, and Nicaragua, are coming because of the political upheaval in their countries. And that's very common. Haiti, our Haitians, of course, are coming from extreme poverty and the situation there. So there are different reasons and different situations depending on where they are from.
Mm-hmm. Sister Mary Alice, in a previous conversation we've had, you mentioned trade. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Mhm.
Did you say trade?
Yes.
Yeah, stop me if I talk too much. Well, I was talking to a Honduran fellow. He happens to be the husband of the woman who broke her leg. And he said to me, it was about the time when Kamala, our vice president, was visiting the various presidents, not just this last visit, but a former one. And he said to me, you know, I planted coffee and I really was very proud of my profession. He's a Honduran. He said, and we're small coffee growers and this is what I did for a living and this is what I love. My country is a beautiful country. He said, but there's no price. There's no price. There's no market for for our products. He said, why doesn't the U.S. government talk to the small growers, the small farmers, the co-ops, not to the government? He says to me. And I said, that sounds like a very brilliant idea. I'll see if I can spread it around. Well, when you go reading up about our trade agreements, you find out that that's the reason why he can't sell his coffee and other farmers cannot sell or are not successful in the market for grains because of CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement. It favors U.S. farmers who are subsidized, by the way. So what happens? Honduras buys grains from the United States cheaply. And so the local growers cannot compete with the US growers. I mean, what's going on? We know we have historical complicity all through Latin America, or certainly in Central America, beginning with, you know, the overthrow of Arbenz in 1950 in Guatemala, who was a democratically elected president, and from then on they've had nothing but massacres and I wouldn't even call them civil wars, just massacres. But the CAFTA thing, once you get into it and start reading about it, it's all wrong because Honduras had a thriving agricultural, thriving agriculture and thriving small farmers before CAFTA, and now they don't. What happens is that the small farmers migrate to the United States. Their young men go to the cities. The gangs try to recruit them. They don't want to be recruited, or they are recruited. Those that don't want to be recruited come to the border. Some of them come alone. Those are the unaccompanied minors. And there you have what's happening. It looks like I just wonder if Kamala talked at all to the president of Guatemala about CAFTA. This was a question in my head. It's just, it's nothing more than a corporate rights agreement. It's a disaster for working people in the environment and rural economics in these countries.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything that you all would like to see from the US government to address these issues? I mean, well, obviously we have a pretty clear connection with our policies and trade and the ripple effects there, but yeah, I mean, other than telling them, you know, do not come, as Kamala Harris said, I think a couple weeks ago now, what is something the US government can do with regard to the root causes rather than our immigration system? Just a big question there.
It would be great if we could really address the issue of really updating a lot of our policies for immigration. A lot of immigrants have been in the United States for 20 plus years. This is not, there's a great number of newcomers as well, but there's a lot larger number, millions. And so we're still sitting on a lot of these legislations that I think could really help us as a nation. And it's kind of interesting because in the United States, we are experiencing a shortage of the labor force. I had a friend recently who was telling me, speaking about growers, and even in the United States, that they closed this plant down where they used to grow olives, and now they're getting the olives from Spain because they were trying to offer to people who are legal or U.S. citizens, paying them $20+ an hour for them to stay, and people didn't want to do those jobs. And here you have a workforce who's willing to stay in the United States and work, and and be able to help the economy. And we're not providing opportunities for them to become legalized. And so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We also have had other programs. I think the United States can definitely learn from other programs that are already in existence, like, for example, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA program. We're noticing that there's a lot of success in that. A lot of the young people who were working during COVID, a lot of people who have died in the medical field, who are the first responders, were a lot of these young people who were recipients of DACA. And so it's showing us that we have great need, and we have people who are willing to, both those who are educated and those who are doing other kinds of jobs, that are willing to come and work. And we're losing out on those opportunities. And it's interesting too, because in the United States, our population is dropping tremendously. I'm on a college board, and one of the concerns we have is, are we going to be able to have enough people to come high school age in the next 5 years? Because the population is dropping significantly here in the United States. But you have young people who are willing to study or to work, and we're not giving them that opportunity. So it doesn't always make sense to me, but I think we have a lot of opportunities of things that already have happened that have shown us that we could really do a lot better here in the United States.
Yeah. Well, and I want to make sure we have time to discuss common criticisms of letting people in. And obviously there are criticisms that are more rooted in racism, but there are some that are based in good faith, and people who are worried about, the welfare state, and, what do we do with like healthcare, all of these other concerns that people have, like, if we can't take care of our own, how can we take care of those coming in? That kind of mentality. So I'm curious what you all say to that perspective. Is there some truth to that this is more of a moral argument, or have you seen that, what's your response to that? I'll let it go.
I think what Veronica said about jobs that immigrants will be able to do and want to do, I think that's something where our government can make it easier for employers to hire immigrants, even undocumented immigrants, who, and this is one of the myths, they do pay sales tax, property tax, Social Security, that they can never benefit from as undocumented immigrants. So they are paying into our Social Security system without being able to benefit from it now. So they are not taking American jobs. They are filling much needed jobs here. And as Veronica said, as our population ages with baby boomers, we need those younger workers. And they want to be here and working. And so we need to find easier ways, a worker visa program that is more available to them, at least that, so that they can come in.
I think another thing that, we haven't mentioned yet, but I think it's definitely a concern I have heard from other people is, the crime rate. That when these people come from all these other countries, they're coming from countries that are, there with a lot of violence. And so they're used to it, and they come here to the US and they just repeat the same things that were happening in their countries. But really in studies, and I know we're going to have some resources at the end, we have found that the number of undocumented immigrants that are arrested is lower than US citizens that are committing crimes. And the reason being that really people want to get away from that kind of situation. They're not going to continue to seek it. And that's why when I work with my clients, they keep sharing with me, I don't want, I'm trying to run away from the drugs, the gang violence. I don't want to be involved in any of those things here. And the last thing I want to do is get in trouble here in the United States, because I would like to stay here, because I'm wanting to get opportunities to be able to stay here. And so I think it's important for us to really look and at the data, because there's a lot of myths out there, and it's really fear-based. But I think it's really beginning to have these experiences. Like, I think, many of us who are sisters, we're on the ground. We meet people, we talk with them, we interact with them, we work with them, and we know that it's just so much more than what we see or we watch on TV. And so I think that that's going to be something, and it's about a mindset as well, that's going to help all of us to really heal. I think immigrants and migrants bring a sense of hope to this nation, which is the history of the United States. I mean, I was a teacher before I was a counselor, and part of our fourth grade curriculum was talking about how great this nation is because it was built by immigrants, and it's a land of immigrants. And we have the Statue of Liberty in New York, and we have Ellis Island, all those stories of people's survival. And what were they looking for? The same thing that the people that we have in front of us are looking for. And we were saying, okay, what about the lines? Well, what lines? There are no lines. If and my clients would say, if there was a line, I would get in line. But what line am I going to get in if I don't even have an opportunity to get in a line? Or we have to wait 20 plus years to be able to get a visa here to come to the United States. And so, it's a lot of that. If there's no accessibility, it's not that you don't want to, you want to be able to benefit, and we want to be able to help, but they're not looking for the health benefits. We actually constantly have to be working with them and letting them know if they've had an emergency. And this has happened with some of my clients, that they've had an emergency and they can apply for emergency Medicaid or Medi-Cal. And that's a benefit that they can receive. And they keep saying to me, no, I don't want to be a burden on the country. And I'm like, yeah, but that's why it's there, because they know you cannot pay. And it was really out of your control that this emergency happened. And so that's why we have these programs, but they're constantly saying, no, if I have to pay, I'll try to pay, even if it takes me however long to pay back. So there's an ethic there that people come with, that they don't want to be a burden to the United States. And that's the least. And most of them will say, I'm not going to apply for food stamps for my kids, even though they're US citizens, because I don't want to be a burden in this country, And so that's always something that they keep sharing with me, because they're conscious, they're aware, they don't want to come and freeload out of the country. They want to work, they want to live, they want to survive.
Thank you. Well, are there any other lingering thoughts that any of you want to share before we wrap it up? I don't want to, we have enough time if someone has something on the tip of their tongue that they'd like to share. Well,
I would just add to what Veronica said just now. The big challenge is really to educate people. And when they're far away from the problem, when they don't know people, when they don't look in their eyes and hear their stories, it's very hard for them to understand. How do we reach them, those that don't want immigrants, that have some sort of anger about the whole immigrant question? There's just a lot they don't know. They don't know they pay taxes. They don't know about the family values that they have. They don't know how they help each other, how you see each other. I met a family just recently. They bought an old rundown blighted house here, for nothing, because there's so many blighted houses in Baltimore that they're just sold for very little, and the immigrants are trying to fix them up. And they're helping each other. They're doing it, families helping families, and they've got all the talents. And they do it on Saturdays when they're not working, or at night. And these are all things that are helping rebuild society and a better world. And they make so many contributions to that. And I think we just have to keep telling our stories and help people to see that their ancestors, and that's why they're here. Everyone deserves that chance. every Thursday, actually.
Thank you all. Well, I apologize if we didn't get to your audience questions, but we will be sending out a follow-up email, so look out for that. Maybe your question will be answered in a previous article that we have written. So before we wrap up, I'm going to turn this over to Sister Veronica, who would like to share a closing passage with us.
So I wanted to share this passage, which comes from one of the more current documents from Pope Francis, Fratelli Tutti, on fraternity and social friendship. I think it'd be a nice message for us to take with us so that we keep remembering the dignity of each person. So I'm going to read it. It is my desire that in this our time, by acknowledging the dignity of each human person, we can contribute to the rebirth of universal aspiration to fraternity, fraternity between all men and women. Here, we have a splendid secret that shows us how to dream and to turn our life into a wonderful adventure. No one can face life in isolation. We need a community that supports and helps us, in which we can help one another to keep looking ahead. How important it is to dream together. By ourselves, we risk seeing mirages, things that are not there. Dreams, on the other hand, are built together. Let us dream then, as a single human family, as fellow travelers, sharing the same flesh, as children of the same earth, which is our common home, each of us bringing the richness of his or her beliefs and convictions, each of us with his or her voice, brothers and sisters, all.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all three of you for this conversation. It's always really interesting to me, even if I've written about it before. There's always something new to learn and to write about. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share with everyone. I will turn this over to Gail again.
I want to echo Soli's thank you to each of you. Soli did a tremendous job getting all of you lined up. It was not easy to get three busy sisters to arrange on the same day and the same time and all the prep. So thank you to Soli. Thank you to Lori Krupp and all my NCR, GSR colleagues for bringing us together. Talking about that network, real quickly, when we did a prep call with Sister Mary Alice, I mentioned a Q&A we had just done, a Global Sisters Report with Sister Mercedes Castillo. And Sister Mary Alice said, oh yes, I know Mercedes. So again, that network is very strong and very vibrant. I would direct you indeed, as Soli said, to our migration section in Global Sisters Report, in which we have a number of stories. And we never tire about reporting on this issue because it is so important to dispel these myths. My background is in economics, and I found myself nodding at, when I worked at Bloomberg News, we did these stories. And one of the quick ones was about someone who will be coming, an immigrant who opened up a shop in Orlando and now employs 55 people. So links will be coming to you in a resource email. So look for that follow-up email. You'll be given a number of things that will help you have these conversations with information and with compassion, and we can help to change some minds and have a civil dialogue in this country about the needs to indeed change our immigration system. So again, please watch for that special email. I wanted to thank all of us who joined us over the last several months for Witness and Grace programs. We're going to take a hiatus over the summer and start again in October. So watch your emails for a program in October. And sisters, I have to say, you've given us enough food for thought that we may revisit this issue again, because there's always more. Maybe we'll do a training session on how to have these difficult conversations. I'd also direct you next week. Again, we are indeed celebrating the Independence Day in this country. Try to have these conversations calmly with your families and watch for a very special package next week that Soli worked on with a wonderful photographer who went to the McAllen Respite Center and did these beautiful photographs in black and white. It's a beautiful depiction of the border and the reality. And so take a look at that. That was also a network because the sisters in McAllen, Texas directed the photographer whose work has been at Harper's and in New York Times and elsewhere to us. So thank you all, sisters. And I'm going to turn this back then to Soli, I guess, who is going to then introduce Sister Mary Alice for closing.
Yes, Sister Mary Alice will close us in prayer. Thank you, Gail.
An immigration creed. I believe in God, who guided the people in exile and in exodus, the God of foreigners and immigrants. I believe in Jesus Christ, a displaced Galilean who fled his country with his parents when his life was in danger. Jesus was persecuted, tortured, and unjustly executed. But he rose from the dead, not as a foreigner, but to offer us citizenship in the new heaven and the new earth. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the eternal immigrant among us, who speaks all languages, lives in all countries, and unites all races. I believe that the true church is where there is a secure home for all peoples, where the communion of saints begins when we embrace all God's people in all their diversity. I believe in life eternal, in which no one will be foreigner, but all will be citizens of the new heaven and the new earth, where God reigns forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Again, thank you all. Have a blessed and wonderful summer. We'll see you in October for the next Witness and Grace programs. Thanks again to sisters and to Soli and to all of you for joining us and for your ministry to so many.
Thank you.